This is Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media. Dave Wemhoff is here tonight. He has written 2 articles, Mirifica, Forgotten by the Catholic Chatterers, and the other one is called Beating Women and Other Lessons from the Taliban, Ethnicity as Antidote to Liberalism. We're going to start out with the Mirifica. I think you're going to touch base with the latest apostolic letter by Pope Francis. I took 2 years of Latin, but it doesn't do me any good. Traditionis Custodiis.
Well, you may as well try the best you can because everybody else had their cut on it, I suppose. And I think you're right. Traditionis Custodiis is right. I think that's the way to say it.
Okay, so Mirifica is the foundation that you're going to be looking at. Any publication that comes out, especially from, I guess, Catholics who are not directly part of the hierarchy, or how would you say it?
Well, Mirifica is the decree on social communications. It came out of Vatican II, December 4th, 1963. I think I've spoken about it before on your program. It's in chapter 98 of my book, John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. And in chapter 98, I discuss Mirifica because it was the first of 2 documents that came out of Vatican II. And it was a very important document because it is a decree, which means it's a law, which means it tells people, Catholics, societies, the chattering class, the government, the episcopate, how they're supposed to deal with the social media. And it seems to me that nowhere and no time ever is that more important than now, when things like Traditionis Custodiis comes out, and you get these incredible articles and this incredible response, to what this document said, to what Francis was saying in the document. So let me go over Mirifica again. Mirifica sets forth the obligations of the bishops and the priests to properly teach Catholics how to use the social media. That means, present and produce content. And also it tells the Catholics how to consume that content, okay? But it also, too, it tells the producers of the content how to produce it. And it also tells the state how the state is supposed to deal with the social communications. Everybody's got a positive, affirmative duties that have to be met. The other day I was interviewed by somebody. I said, have you heard of Mirifica? And I got this quizzical look on his face. I said, well, you're doing better than most people because they've never heard of it. But it's so important, okay?
No,
well,
can I interject
here?
Yeah,
sure.
The Vatican II, in the aftermath, there was a strong emphasis some quarters on evangelism. And doesn't Mirifica presuppose that Christians or Catholics are using the media ultimately to promote the gospel?
Yes, you're supposed to promote the gospel. You're supposed to promote the truth. There are several things that are required. I wrote them down. I don't want to miss anything. I want to follow my own advice here and the advice of Mirifica and present this document correctly. And so what this document said, along with the pastoral instructions that issued in January 1971, those pastoral instructions also reiterated doctrine. Okay, what you're supposed to do if you are a Catholic and you're in social media. That means if you're a Catholic and if you've got a YouTube show, or if you got a magazine, or if you write books, or if you have some website where you comment, you've got to follow certain rules.
Okay, let me interject again. What's the authority of Mirifica? Because that's part of what you're arguing is authority. What is the authority of that document?
Well, it's the council. The council promulgated it.
Okay, but in light of all other authorities that the church has, they have different levels of authority. How authoritative is Mirifica?
Oh, the decree is very high. A decree is higher than a declaration. Dignitas Humanae was a declaration, kind of like a policy statement. A decree is law of the church. This is what you got to do, okay? And then after that, it's a constitution, which is higher yet.
Okay. Give us some other decrees. Is there other decrees that people are familiar with? They're not familiar with this one?
That's the only one I can think of right now. You've got Gaudium et Spes, which is a constitution. Lumen Gentium is a constitution. But this is the only decree that I can think of right now. That came out of Vatican II.
Really?
Yeah, this is the only one I can think of. There were probably others. I can't remember them right now. There's a little book by Austin Flannery that has all those documents in there. The front piece or the foreword was written by Cardinal John Cardinal Wright, and he said, we need to clean up our understanding of these documents. He said, because people are getting a bad understanding of these documents, and so we are making a very clear translation and putting them in this book, and that's what they did. So that's the only decree that I know of. So, but these are the things that the practitioners of the social communications, the social media have got to do. They got to be a competent authority in the thing they're talking about. Now, there's two phrases there. They got to have goodwill. That means they have to want to cooperate, to bringing about this decree and spreading the truth. Okay? They've got to have, when it comes to religious matters, you have to have serious and competent persons dealing with those matters. Again, that issue of competency. I mean, I'm not a surgeon. I can't write about brain surgery. I mean, I can read a book, and then I can tell you what's in that book, but I'm not competent to talk about that. So you need religious writers who are going to be serious and competent persons. When the social media is used, you have to state the truth, and then you have to accurately reflect the situation. Accurately reflect the situation, because what you're doing is you are building culture, you're preaching the gospel, you're having an impact on human souls. That's what the council recognized. I mean, it was a brilliant document. And it was a document the Americans hated, and we'll go into that in a minute. The Americans and the Americanists hated. So why is this, why is this so important now? Well, because you get articles like this, Traditiones Custodes came out July 16th. You get articles that came out a few days later, quote, Traditiones Custodes, an act of war against faithful Catholics. Here's another. I mean, it just goes downhill from that. Then another one, crippled religion strikes again. And Summorum Pontificum, which is what Benedict XVI wrote, cuts the axe. And then you got a guy who wrote, we resist Francis to his face. Pacamama Pope anathematizes the Latin Mass.
No, these are,
it goes downhill from
these
there.
Are prominent Catholics.
These are prominent Catholics that have wide followings.
Now, how about you're not supposed to speak evil of the ruler of the people?
Well,
are they free to rebuke the Pope? I mean, are they free under Catholic teaching? What's their freedom under Catholic teaching that they can?
They have to talk the truth about this. They can't inflame people. So did these guys, first of all, what's their credibility? What's their training, in religious matters? Do they have the training? Do they have the experience with this kind of stuff? Have they studied it? What are they doing here? Are they just inflaming people's passions with this? Are they a competent authority? It's the first question. Are they presenting it truthfully and accurately? And I didn't find that with most of these guys. I didn't find a truthful and accurate depiction or discussion of what was going on in these documents. Because Traditiones Custodes is the edict, if you will, or the apostolic letter, and then you got a letter from the Pope where he explains what he's doing. And I don't know, you read those and you kind of figure out what's going on, but you got to tell the consuming audience what you're doing.
Well, okay.
So these guys aren't being clamped down on by the bishops, but the consuming audience is going to have to vet these people in their minds.
Okay, what I'm saying is, in the American government, you got the legislative and the executive. That's been legislated, but it's a joke if it's not going to be enforced. So here's my question. If that's true, and that's a decree of the highest order in the church, then there has to be an enforcement arm to it.
There has to be an enforcement on Mirifica. But we don't really see the episcopacy, and we don't see the priests going out there and talking to all these writers and chatterers. I call them chatters. They all got their magazines. They all put out their books. They all have their little shows, I don't see any of the religious, any of the prelates doing anything to guide these guys. I'm not
Which
aware
means
of anything.
Mirifica is just hiding away in a vault somewhere. Because if they're not enforcing that...
It's not in the vault anymore. We've opened the vault door today.
Okay.
We're letting it out. And so this is what we have to do, folks.
The pressure is then on the bishops who are supposed to enforce it.
Well, they're supposed to train the people in how to use it. They're supposed, to vet it and check it. That's what they're supposed to do, but they're not doing that. So it falls down now on the discerning public, okay? So it's up to us, okay? So we have got to see if somebody's writing something or saying something, are they competent authority? Okay, so so-and-so has a degree in American literature. Ooh, that sounds impressive. That means they know how to write fiction, all right? Does that mean that they know science, that they know economics, that they know theology? Does that mean that? No, it doesn't, okay? So, to the credit of some of the chatterers, they had more qualified people, if you will, actually address, the issues in TC. We just call it TC, it's easier that way. But in TC, they had some more qualified people address it, to their credit. But once again, we have to ask the question, who are these people that are coming out here and telling us what to think? Why should we believe them? Why are they writing? What's their backgrounds? One of the funniest things that I find is that you see so much uproar in the church about married priests versus unmarried priests, celibate priests, so on and so forth. But so many of these chatterers that just whip so many people up are married with families. Why should you believe them before the priests? Why shouldn't you demand of your chatterers the same standards you demand of the priests? If they're going to talk about something, well, shouldn't they be celibate too? What are their credentials? What if, there's in the rules of evidence, and I bring this up because, Dr. Jeff Myris brought this up when he critiqued Taylor Marshall's ridiculous book, Infiltration. And 2 years ago, Dr. Myris wrote a piece. So I think he's a credible individual. He's got incredible credentials, and so he wrote a piece where he said, "Infiltration: An Idiot's Guide to the Problems of the Catholic Church." Yeah, that's a good title for an article. So basically, what he said, you have to consider 4 rules, and one of them is the rules of evidence. You gotta when you're doing your work, you gotta look at the rules of evidence. And you got to just say, well, because we're in the same room doesn't mean we have a conspiracy. It's you got to link things closer together, basically. And I think that's a very good point, okay? So these people have got to operate in accordance roughly with the rules of evidence, okay? Well, Rule 702 of the Federal Rules of Evidence talks about expert testimony. I think it's perfectly on point. I think what you're dealing with here is in Rule 702, you're dealing with 4 things. You got the expert, before somebody can give an opinion on what something means, on the significance of something, they got to show they got the right training in that area, okay? So if they're going to critique a book on brain surgery, I think they better be a brain surgeon, okay? Don't you think? I think they should.
If we had our voting system, you can't vote unless you're an expert in politics. How about that? But apparently we don't apply this.
But we're talking here about competent authority in the social communications that affect people's views of the world, of the culture, of each other, that can bring us together, that can evangelize the world, okay? So we're talking social communications used to advance the truth, to build culture, to save souls. Okay? So if you got people who are talking about stuff that don't know what they're talking about, you're not going to help anybody. So that's why you got to have a competent authority. So they got to have the training under Rule 702. They got to evaluate the facts and the data. They got to have reliable principles and methods that they use to look at the data, and then the expert has to reliably apply that. It's got to be somebody who can actually analyze it and work on it. Now, here's the problem, though, with that approach. It's so darn dry. It's so dry, and people want to get whipped up. They want to get worked up. They want that fiction writer telling them a story, man, so they can get into it and they can understand it. But is that necessarily a good thing?
Well, we live in an entertainment culture, don't we? Entertainment has been, that's the whole idea of eutrapelia and the whole idea that it's all right to have some leisure, but we're majoring on the minors. In other words, should there be any leisure time, so to speak, and any entertainment time, because now people are used to, they want to be entertained.
Well, they want to be entertained, but that's what we're told. We're told people want to be entertained, but I'm not so sure they do want to be entertained. I think they want to be informed. I think they want to know the truth. I think people want to know the truth, and I don't think you should entertain them with important issues.
But truth is really scary to most people. It
Well,
truly
sure it
is. It truly is. And
sure
so the government hates truth straight up. That's why you have people that are comedians.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think the government works on truth. I think that it may not present truth to other people. That's true, but I think the government internally has got to operate on truth as a general rule.
Well, I don't think people would agree. I mean, with the Biden administration and what seems to be the truth, it seems like there's resistance to it. That's most people's perception.
Well, okay, I think we're talking about two different understandings here. What I'm saying is that when people within the government work with each other, they got to be honest with each other. What's going on? This is what's going on. You have an ideology of the Biden administration which is not based on truth. You're right. It's not based on truth. Okay? It's based on an ideology. And America is based on an ideology. It's based on liberalism. That's not truth. It's a wrong analysis, a wrong understanding of human nature.
So the Biden administration is similar to all past administrations because they've all been based on liberalism.
Yeah, I think that's right. It is.
So then truth is not at the forefront then of liberalism.
Truth is not at the forefront of liberalism. This society is not based on truth, and we all suffer because of it. And it's been that way from day one, really, with the foundational principles of the national government.
Right. And Jesus' teaching was like really strong on your foundation has to be grounded in truth.
Yeah, it has to be
If it's not grounded on truth, when the troubles come, you're going to be like a house that's blown over because it's built on sand.
And that's why Pius IX said in 1864 in Quanta Cura, he said societies serve either one or two things. One, they either serve God, and if they don't serve God, then they're going to serve wealth. That's what he said. And that's true. And the people who run the society now are the plutocrats. And if you doubt that, I asked you, just look at big tech, how they're shutting everybody down. Look at the billionaires going into outer space. Look at the billions and billions of dollars that go into the pockets of private people, powerful private interests, the top 1/10 of 1% as a result of legislation.
He said that in 1864?
He said that December 8th, 1864.
No, that's Pope Pius IX.
Pope Pius IX.
Right. Now, don't forget,
Blessed Pius
he
IX.
was very close. He was in very close correspondence with Jefferson Davis. Okay, the Southerners, their battle was against the money-loving North. That's how they saw it. The North was sold out to the love of money. The Southerners were purposely trying to do the opposite. They were an agrarian. Their money was in their slaves, which kept, paper money and all that at bay. The Pope understood exactly how the South felt. He was in strong correspondence with them. The enemies of Jefferson Davis were almost the very same type of enemies that were against the Pope. So the Northerners were radical lovers of money, and they won the war, and boom, the Gilded Age hits, it keeps going, and now money's all in the 1%.
It's in the 1/10 of 1%.
The Pope was fighting it, and the interests of Christianity were completely undermined with the victory of Lincoln. That's what I would say.
They're printing money at an incredible rate in this country, and that is the effect of inflation. And what it's doing is it's driving up the price of assets. So the people who get the money put in their pockets from the printing presses are the ones who have power. The rest of us who work and who don't have that kind of financial leverage, we don't get it. Okay, we're being slowly squeezed.
We're becoming the wage slaves.
The wage slaves are being crushed slowly but surely. And so that's why you're seeing things like Robinhood apps that come up, because people are going to gamble on the market to try to increase their holdings. But this society operates primarily for the purpose of the plutocrats. And it floats a lot of boats. Don't get me wrong. It floats a lot of boats, okay? And a lot of people benefit from it, okay? But it comes at a price. It comes at a price. That's it. So the Americans really, and the Americanists really fought this idea of inter mirifica. And this guy, John Cogley, of course, was a Catholic. He was big in the Catholic publishing area at the time. He was a worker for the big plutocratic think tanks at the time. So he wrote up a document that was signed by Michael Novak, another Catholic, Robert Blair Kaiser, some Redemptorists, and John Courtney Murray. And he said, the document says, quote, and I'm going to read it, by its moralistic emphasis and simplistic treatment of the difficult problem of art and prudence, it appears to deny intrinsic value of the work of art and to compromise the integrity of the Christian artist. While the document speaks of the primary moral obligation of those who communicate information, primarily moral obligation of those who communicate information, it never speaks of the obligations of those who should be the source of information which society needs. It fails to come to grip with the problems of all those who are victimized by authoritarian secrecy. See, this is one of the things that the plutocrats hate. A powerful and independent government. They have all throughout history. The flat statement in number 14 seems to imply that the specifications of natural law and Christian judgment are effortlessly provided in the Catholic press. This could be interpreted as endowing the Catholic press with teaching authority and near infallibility. That is neither proper to journalism nor helpful to the formation of public opinion in the church. The document appears to be setting up an intermediate ecclesiastical authority between the individual communication worker and his employer. This is likely to be taken as a threat to the integrity of the media. It will seriously compromise the layman working in the general or secular press. Well, the media doesn't want anybody telling them you got to follow the truth.
I mean, the media generally, you go to Notre Dame, the student newspaper, The Observer, you go to the who runs the journalist department of all the public schools, South Bend Tribune. Typically the media is run by super liberal people. From the get-go, when they go into the media in some small fashion in 6th grade, 7th grade, these are your hyper-liberal people, 89% of them.
Oh, I agree with you, Peter. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, so it's endemic. I mean, it's systemic, endemic. It's just how things are, and the Christians are losing that battle.
Losing their battle. The Council Fathers tried to do something about it. They got subverted by their own people. The Catholic Church has been subverted by its own people. And then in two important passages, it seems to give gives the state, the civil authorities, an authority over mass media, which is dangerous to political liberty everywhere, and which in some countries like the United States is proscribed by constitutional law. Well, they're talking about the First Amendment there, okay? They wanted to defend the First Amendment, which basically says you can do anything you want. After Sullivan versus New York Times, you can write almost anything you want about anybody as long as there's no actual malice. Well, I mean, that is not the Catholic standard. That's not the standard for disseminating truth. That allows the media to shape people, to affect people, to keep power in the hands of the plutocrats, and to really corrupt people. And has there been any doubt of progressive corruption and disintegration of this society since at least 1947 with the Everson case? No, there isn't.
Right, so God's voice is not allowed. No. His opinion, his word, because of the First Amendment primarily, right. He cannot come in and order things.
Right.
Okay. Even though he's God, I'm God. I've been around quite a while.
Sorry, God.
I was here first, and
God, you're interfering with the press.
Wrong. He can't come in and say that you can't do that.
That's right.
Well, he's got the authority to say that. In fact, he has the duty to say it, but he's not allowed to in this country.
Right. That's right, and that's why they shut down the church.
Well, that's an act of insanity. The people will all end up in a mental institution operating under that kind of system.
Well, what was her name? Was it Martha Stout or Dr. Stout, a Harvard psychologist? She wrote the book, The Sociopath Next Door. Well, she said in liberal societies, the rate of sociopathology is very high. It's very high.
Well, yeah, because your mental illness is when you're keeping God away. That's the definition of mental illness. What else could it be?
I think that's right. Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah, so the whole document is a piece of mental illness. The whole Constitution, if it's saying, no, God, your law can't rule here, well, you're on the path of Nebuchadnezzar, right?
The First Amendment is the heart of the American experiment. And it gives power to the plutocrats, and it always has. And when they asked Sean Spicer on Thanksgiving Day last year, how come George Soros and Antifa can burn our cities, destroy our businesses, hurt our people with impunity? What was the first phrase out of his mouth? Because of the First Amendment. That's what Sean Spicer said. If he can see it, everybody else can see it. We don't want to fight for freedom. We don't want freedom. We want truth. We want goodness. We don't want freedom.
Well, freedom,
we want
freedom
truth and
means
goodness.
whatever. Freedom is a subjective word. You can't. That word cannot honestly be just thrown about because the definition is too vague. Okay. Truth, on the other hand, is a different type of word than freedom.
Yeah, it is.
Inter Mirifica was written to, I think you said it earlier, to really come against the American ideology.
I think it was a way to counter psyops. That's what I said. But also the church fathers knew, I mean, the council fathers knew how powerful the American media was. And they saw how everything was being twisted at the council. And they were furious. And they went back to the U.S. and to their home countries, and they complained about that. And they knew something was wrong. And so the first thing they did was come up with this document, which was subverted by its own intellectuals. The church's own intellectuals turned on it. And as a practical matter, the church's intellectuals still do the same thing. They've ignored it. So in my article, I say, you know what? Inter Mirifica says that there should be codes, like the old production code. Well, maybe all the Catholic chatters can get together and sign on to a production code, where they say, they start with the Catholic chatters, where we agree to certain things. Well, of course, they're not going to be able to do that because they all got their market share and they all got their little niche and they all got their different take on things. And unfortunately, nobody wants to mediate between them. But I think it's progress if we just get all the chatterers out there to acknowledge Inter Mirifica. Maybe that'll be the first step. Well, all the chatterers will say, I read Inter Mirifica, and they can hold up an Inter Mirifica copy.
It used to be real simple before Vatican II because your typical Catholic home would not read a serious book dealing with anything that touched on their Catholic faith. They would not read that book unless it had the nihil obstat.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And the imprimatur.
Right. So
yeah, that's right.
How can the same religious people, the next generation, how can they be so careful not to take anything into their head unless it had the nihil obstat, right. And then you turn around and you're going, what are you taking in your head? Does it have a nihil obstat? I mean, this we're talking insanity.
Well, that's partly, that's partly the failure of the episcopacy. But that's why I think we're doing this program, Peter, is we're saying to the consuming public out there, hey, folks, here are some standards by which to evaluate what happened, okay, and what's happening. And I understand how people can get some chatterer, some scribbler who they like because they like the way he or she writes, and they identify. But are they really a competent authority in something? Are they really analyzing it properly? You asked me to read Traditionis Custodes, TC. You asked me to read it. I said, Peter, I'm doing other things. You kept bothering me. Right. Come on. I said, okay, fine. So I sat down, I read the thing, I read the letter, I read TC. TC referred back to SP, which is Benedict XVI. Benedict XVI, I think he referred back to Ecclesia Dei. So, you kind of read back on this stuff, okay. And so that's the framework. And so, you can look at TC, and what I see in the letter associated with TC is from Francis. He's saying, we got a situation where the missal as the term for the Mass. Good boy. The Missal as the term for the Mass. My dog Spartacus is here. So the Missal as the term for the Mass, whether it's Novus Ordo or the 1962 version, is in the situation of the traditional Latin Mass. The traditional Latin Mass Missal is being used as a rallying point to say, oh, well, the liturgy of the Novus Ordo isn't true, and the Vatican II Council isn't true, and we have a new church, okay? And then he also said, and I understand, like Benedict XVI, that there have been abuses of the liturgy. What was the phrase he used? It was a great phrase. Unbearable distortions of the liturgy, of the Novus Ordo liturgy. Well, that's an understatement. There have been unbearable distortions. But what he focused on was the group of people who were rallying around the 1962 Missala Romanum, the traditional Latin Mass. And some of these people have regular parishes that are not in schism with the church. They have Latin Mass there. They have Latin Mass groups there. These people are not in schism. They go to the Latin Mass, but there's this growing sense, or so he perceived, or so he was told it was perceived, according to the face of these documents that he put out there, that these were becoming rallying points to say that there's a rupture. There's a rupture in the church from pre-Vatican II to post-Vatican II, and Vatican II was the problem. Well, Vatican II is not the problem. You can't say Vatican II is a rupture. You can't. If you say that, you're wrong. You don't believe in the Holy Spirit. You don't understand what went on at Vatican II. If you say Vatican II is a rupture, then you don't know the Catholic faith, and you don't know how it's put together, and you don't know what happened to Vatican II.
I would say that the rupture is, because Vatican II did say that the people are the church. They emphasize that, the laity. But the group that belongs to the Novus Ordo, those people, they believe in theistic evolution across the board.
I went to a Novus Ordo Mass today, and I don't believe in theistic evolution.
There's some that don't, but I'm talking about the differences.
Okay.
The differences of the two groups are huge. One group believes, maybe majority, six-day creation.
I'm not ready to agree with that or disagree, because I don't have the data.
Let's just say if, okay? Just think about it. If the vast majority believe in six-day creation, which is huge, they believe in a literal Adam and Eve, the other group doesn't. They believe in a literal Noah, the other group doesn't. That's just that. Then you have one group believes the women ought to have the head covering. That's huge. That means they ought to be submissive. That means it's a whole different world view of the Latin Mass. This group thinks totally different. They have a different mindset on very important issues than the other group. They're going to clash. They're just going to naturally clash. I'm just making that point. That's the real issue.
Hypothetical, which we don't know if it's true or not.
People know. They know because they know both groups. There's people that know.
I mean, I know people, and once again, I haven't done the studies, but I know people who like traditional Latin Mass, and they think Vatican II was totally heretical, and wow, wow. Well, you don't really know the religion, and so you got the catechism. This is the catechism here, right? Okay, there. I've been using it a lot. And then this is a companion to the catechism, which gets you on the road to understanding what's in the catechism, which really says a lot of the things that I think you would argue the traditional Latin Mass crowd would say was the Catholic faith before Vatican II. I think if you take a look at, come here, boy. I think if you would take a look at what the traditional Latin Mass crowd says is the Catholic religion before Vatican II, I think if you look at the catechism and you understand Catholic doctrine and you study it and you get it from the right authorities, you'll see a lot of that stuff is in there. Somebody the other day asked me about, well, error has no rights. I said, yeah, that's right, error has no rights. Well, Vatican II did away with that, they said. I said, no, you need to look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I just looked it up, section 2108. It basically says error has no rights. You can't believe whatever you want to believe? No. Okay, that's a different way of saying it. I went to Novus Ordo Mass today, and I looked at the people, and they're doing their best, and they're trying their best. I don't like the music, right? But they're there, they're doing their best. And I went to St. John Cantius 3-4 months ago in Chicago. Absolutely beautiful traditional Latin Mass, traditional church. You should go there. I mean, I can understand why that is intimidating. I understand why the traditional Latin Mass in this traditional church is so intimidating. And the priest got up there, and St. John Cantius is in full communion with the Catholic Church. It is not, as I understand it, is not schismatic, okay? And they're one of the biggest contributors to the Archdiocese of Chicago. So the Archdiocese of Chicago is not going to do away with that Latin Mass. And Traditionis Custodes gave some authority to the bishops, to look at the Latin Masses in their area and do what they got to do. But that's detailed in there, okay? So you go there and you look at the people, and they look like they want to do the best. They're docile. You look at the people in the Novus Ordo Mass. I looked at them today. I sat there and looked at everybody, and they're docile. They want to do the right thing. They want this to be a holy event. Okay, so this is what you're dealing with. But the Pope is saying that there is a group of people, who say, well, here's the Latin Mass. It goes to show the Vatican II was wrong. Well, there is a group of people like that. However, there's also a group of people who are into the spirit of Vatican II, and that's Father James Martin. And Father James Martin, come here, boy. And Father James Martin, is the guy who runs around as carrying water for the LGBTQ. Well, if you're carrying water for the LGBTQ, you're carrying water for the plutocrats, okay? Because they're the guys who set the agenda in society of what's valued and what isn't, okay? They're the guys who do it, okay? That's the Bill Gates, it's the billionaires, that's those guys. They do it. They got the power.
Okay. So if, just hypothetical, if Inter Mirifica was being fully enforced as you think it ought to be, what would be the difference in the church right now?
I think you would have probably the church organs would become more robust. But once again, you need leadership. And I'm sorry. I mean, you look at a lot of the leadership in the church, the priests and the bishops, and it's a little disheartening, frankly.
Well, you got Kavanaugh and Barrett on the Supreme Court with Gorsuch. They came in mainly through the suggestion of the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. We know they don't get there on their own. Bishop Rhodes didn't get there on his own. What system? Is it the flaw of the system that is not putting the proper men in place? Is it a flaw of how they train them?
Well, I've said in my book and in a lot of writings and talks that the leadership of the Catholic Church has largely become Americanist, and which means that
you're saying across the world?
Across the world, yeah. I think around the world they're Americanist. And you may have pockets in Africa or some other places where they're not so Americanist, but they still got to come to Rome. Well, okay. And that's Americanist.
Let's go back. World War II was called a world war.
Yeah.
And who won that war?
America won that war. Okay. The United States of America won that war.
Right, and we were fighting evil.
As defined by the leadership of the United States.
The propaganda. In other words, Americans after World War II were walking around with a halo. And they were still walking around with a halo when Vatican II started.
Yeah, we're talking 17 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. That you have to look at the context of this thing. But the leadership of the Catholic Church is very Americanist. And
America cleared the world of evil.
And when you buy into Americanism, you buy into rule by the plutocrats. That's my theory.
But what's the common definition of Americanism way back? They were saying John Zahm was a leader of the Americanist movement even back in 1894. So has the definition changed, or what's the common steady definition?
Americanism is essentially saying that America got it right. So then you have to downpedal certain doctrines of the church and emphasize others, and you got to buy into this idea of the Holy Spirit acting directly to people. You don't need the discipline of the church, and you can't, emphasize certain doctrine if it's going to alienate people. So basically, you got to take on a commercial air. The church has got to become commercial, and when you're in a commercial enterprises, you can't really tick people off, okay? You got to kind of work with them. You got to stroke their egos. You got to know how to politic, okay? And that's what this whole idea of liberalism was about. You know, John Locke was this poor kid picked out of the dirt, you know, by this royal family, this aristocracy, a smart kid, and he came up with all these ideas, you know, Locke's view of government and representative government, and these ridiculous ideas that are used, you know, to basically control people, because there's three things the plutocrats really are terrified of: a strong independent government, a strong independent church, and an angry mob they just figured out it got had. So the best way to take care of the mob is say, hey, you got representative government, you can all like participate. Yeah, so we were all, it's civics, it's civil society. We're civil society. And we're all free. So that floats everybody's boat. And that's what's being imposed in Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, that's your second paper, and I'm interested in the Afghanistan paper because I'm going to give the end of the story.
Okay.
But the bottom line is that the Taliban is fighting to maintain men's rule over women, and I would argue that Mirifica is challenging American liberalism, which I would boil down to, if you could boil it down, it boils down to matriarchy in my mind. So the battle always is who's running the home. The battle always boils down to, is the man ruling over the woman? Now, of course, we're talking, there's a Muslim way of ruling, there's a Christian way of ruling, and of course, I believe in a Christian way of ruling, but it's still, the battle still is that man ruling over, is that husband ruling over his wife? That is essentially always the battle.
Yeah, what you're saying is, who's in the corner office in the family? Is it mom? Is it dad? Is it mom and dad? Is it the kids? Is it everybody? No. You've got to have, what you're saying, and I believe there's a lot of authority for this, is that you've got to have somebody ruling the family, okay? A family is like a little military unit. It really is. And so in military units, you got to have one leader, okay, where the buck stops, okay? And it's supposed to be the dad. And a lot of guys aren't cut out to be dads, and they shouldn't be dads. Shouldn't be priests either. So what do they do? I don't know. But they shouldn't have families unless the father is going to rule the home. So and I agree with you on this, and I think that and I've told you this for a long time, I agree, the father's got to rule the home. And he's got to rule the home in accordance with God's law. Mm-hmm. Because the civil authorities have got to rule that as society in accordance with God's law.
Yeah, because the scripture says you can't be an elder in the church unless you rule your home well, which means you can't just rule your home. It has to be according to God's law. So ruling it well is he does rule it according to God's law, having your children in subjection with all gravity. There's hardly any homes in America that are run that way. Hardly any.
Well, I grew up in a home that was very normal. And Dad ran the home, and Mom acceded to what he wanted. And we knew Dad ran the home. And it was a great upbringing. It was a wonderful upbringing. It was idyllic. But this society didn't like that. And so it promotes all the freaks and weirdos and damaged people. And it going back to our earlier conversation. I mean, I can tell you a couple of notable Catholic chatters claim to have trauma in their lives. Well, maybe it shouldn't be a chatter then. You know, maybe you need to deal with that trauma and shut up and sit down. Okay. But that's what's got to happen. The father's got to rule the home. And so when guys are looking to get married, you got to tell the woman, guys, you got to say to the woman, you got to say, okay, I'm going to be in charge of this family. My mission is your mission. Making me look good is your job. And you're here to cook, clean, help take care of the kids. You're going to be primary with the kids. And then, you know, you got to be a nice hostess and a lot of other little things. You got to make my life easier and comfortable to come back to, because this is my clan, my tribe, my family in its infancy.
No, you've already missed the major point.
Oh boy.
Okay. You're already American. You're an American. Okay.
I am an American. That is an ethnic group.
Because they're blind on the essentials of the marriage. Because who arranges the marriages actually?
Well,
it is the father of the home.
I'm not going there.
Well, it's the father of the home that is consulting with his daughter, and he's saying, honey, I make the final decision on who you're marrying.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying.
And there's various reasons. And the father's going to go, honey, nobody knows what to look for, but I do know. You have to marry somebody that's going to know how to rule you and the children, okay? And I will not allow you to pick somebody who cannot rule you and rule you well, okay?
I like it, Peter.
Okay.
I like that.
Now, ruling her well means, does he have a skill that's independent of the wicked system? Can he support you, or does he have to have a job, okay, and end up working for the wicked system, okay? No, I want you to pick. You're going to pick out a husband. We're going to pick out a husband that has an independent skill of the system that can support you, and that he will know how to raise his children, giving the son a skill, marrying off his daughters, and raising you up strongly in the Word of God.
I like that. I like it. When we were growing up, we were told by my parents, me and my two siblings were told by our parents who to marry and who not to marry. That's what we were told. When we got out of that family and went to Notre Dame, of course, we had our faith stripped from us. And then we were told, civil society just knows better. Well, no, you're at the pleasure of the plutocrats. But that's right. So why do you do that? Why do you have a tight family? Because the nuclear family is the building block of society, right? We hear that over and over again from Catholics, right? It's a building block, right? But it can't exist without a higher society that protects and defends this image that you and I have presented. Okay, so that's the tribe, right? That's the tribe. That's the ethnicity. That's the civil authority. Now, guys, the reality is that if you are harsh with your wife now, or you conduct mental cruelty on her, you're going to be in front of a judge. She's going to sue you for divorce because the laws are against you. Okay, so I don't recommend using physical force on any women, and you got to be really careful. But you have to establish these rules from the beginning, like we've been talking. That has to be laid down from the beginning. The Taliban know this, and I know something about Afghanistan because years ago I studied it in depth, and I had occasion to study it in depth. And so what became very clear is that you had a reaction by the Taliban against the liberal society that was being pushed down on them in the form of the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. See, Articles 1 and 2 said this is an Islamic society. This is an Islamic republic. And then all the other articles of the Constitution, all 50-some, take away that. Make it so Sharia law is not going to work here, okay? Well, the Taliban understood that, and it became very clear in my research that the one thing that they were terribly concerned about, and this was from a number of sources that were out there in the press, in the early 2000s, shortly after the American invasion of Afghanistan. There was a lot of sources out there saying, the Taliban got a real problem with this form of social organization because the role of the women is elevated and because of individualism. And so they're going to push back. And the Taliban was kind of like an antibody of the Pashtun tribes. Mostly the Taliban came from the Pashtun tribes. There were a number of papers that were written that came out in 2009. There was one that'll be in my article. There was another discussion in 2008. But these papers describe the organization of the tribes, and how they supported the Taliban, and how there were intertribal conflicts among the Pashtuns, okay, but they still supported the Taliban, and the Taliban still got primary support. And it was very hard to break away the tribes from the Taliban because the Taliban was the antibodies, if you will, to this foreign system that's coming in, trying to reorder society.
But reorder it specifically, where they were mostly concerned, where they wanted to reorder it, was the traditional way the husband ruled his home.
I think that's right.
And that was a direct threat to the men who were the fighters.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. And the women were going to be educated, have their own careers, have their individualism, and basically do what they wanted to do.
So we were the serpent, we were the great Satan, coming in, whispering the serpent's voice to the woman. And we were hoping for that.
Who's we? I mean, you're saying
America.
Well, okay, the U.S. Okay,
The U.S. Yeah, and we're
U.S. and Western allies.
Eat the forbidden fruit. Go ahead and you should have more authority in the home. You should be able to get educated, which education meant. You write about it. What is education basically? They needed to be educated. You talked about how they had in your article they developed 9 times more schools.
Yeah, it was just the figures are out there. UNICEF publishes them. It's just this massive increase. They went from 9,000 girls in primary school in 1999 when the Taliban ruled to hundreds of thousands now in primary and secondary school. So there's this huge body now of educated women. But what the Constitution also did is that it took the deracinated peoples like the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaris, and it basically made them equal partners with the Pashtuns. Well, Afghanistan's Pashtun. They created that country. And half the Pashtuns are in Afghanistan and half are in
Pakistan.
Half are in Pakistan and Waziristan. And so, how did that happen? Well, I think it has something to do with the English. So they just kind of drew that line there because they didn't want them to be that powerful. So anyways, what happened is the Pashtuns were able to kind of play both sides off during this war. And so right now, as we talk, the Taliban are just sweeping through the country. My estimate is the Taliban will probably take over the country.
I think that was the front page of the paper today.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
they've already penetrated the green zone.
They're trying to, they're trying to bomb, or this and that, but they can't stop them.
They're very aggressive. They're very successful, and they're just rolling up the government forces.
Well, they know what they want. They do not want their wives to be corrupted by the Western culture. And once they're corrupted, they won't be able to rule their home, and they will be henpecked like they are over here, and they don't want to be henpecked husbands.
And that's the end of the Pashtun tribes. That's the end of their people. There's 60 tribes. There's several million. They've actually grown. The numbers have actually grown over the course of the war. But there's like 60 tribes and a couple of major tribes, and they know that's the end of their society.
Now, in the book of Esther, you had the Persian Empire. That's not the Persian Empire, but nevertheless, it probably went. The Persian Empire was huge back at the time of the book of Esther, and the theme of the book of Esther was it had one main theme. The king orders Queen Vashti to come to him during the end of her little party, and she refused to come. And the 7 wise men said, "King, the 180-day party's over. Everybody's going to go back to their home," which
that's longer than any party at Notre Dame.
Yeah, they had a 180-day party, and the women had a 7-day party. And he ordered Queen Vashti, which, of course, she was one of the most beautiful women in the kingdom. And she said, "I'm not coming. I'm not going to come." And the 7 wise men said, "King, if you don't divorce her and replace her with another woman, the story of what she did by disobeying you, they will carry that back throughout all your kingdom. And your kingdom will be over because the women will despise their husbands in the home. They will lose authority and respect in that home, and your kingdom will be done." Okay? In other words, if the men are not ruling the home, everybody knows that should know, you cannot have a kingdom.
So then who rules when the men don't rule?
Well, not the women necessarily. It'll be the plutocrats, I guess.
I think it's going to be the plutocrats. That's who I think it's going to be.
So I was told by somebody who's a cultural genius, if I mentioned his name, Kevin McDonald. I think he's a genius. He believes in evolution, but
hey, he's a scholar.
He's a scholar. He says their whole goal is to a strong father in the home is their enemy. Period. A strong father in the home is their enemy, and of course, a strong Christian father would be the real enemy.
Well, that's the natural law. Then he can see the natural law in operation.
Yeah, because he's an evolutionist, but he's looking at natural law.
Sure, he can see it. He can see that's how it's supposed to be. That's how it is. So, that's what you're dealing with, I think, over there. And all this stuff was out in the open. All this stuff, we've talked about was all in articles and in reports from The Economist, for instance, and all this other stuff. And then all these other publications. Then you had all these studies that came out. The Council for Foreign Relations came out in November of 2008, and then Counterterrorism Center came out in August of 2009, and they laid all these dynamics out there. Secretary of Defense Bob Gates in October 2008 was saying, we need to work with the tribes, to pacify the area. But then he was told, don't do that. And the later studies that came out said, we've got this struggle between using the tribes for political gain to pacify the area versus trying to impose, a progressive regime. It's a progressive regime versus tribal traditionalism. Well, wow. I mean, that's in the 2009 study from the counterterrorism.
Now, we only have two or 3 minutes left. Now, can you take that? Okay, go ahead.
But I just want to say, this is what's in all the business school books. Okay, traditional societies are not progressive societies. There are blocks to the development of markets, to the accumulation of wealth. I mean, wow, right there. They said it.
Yeah, in other words, a strong father in the home. I just read that American households are $15 trillion in debt.
Probably so.
15 trillion. Now, if you had a strong father in the home, Christian father, he will have, as one of his objectives, it would be, we're not going into debt. Okay? He'll just already have that tone. We're not going to go into debt. Well, I want this. He's going to tell his wife, we're not having that. But he can't say no to her. Okay? So they buy it. And that's just in that area. There's all kinds of areas where he can't say no.
But this is where the church needs to step in and help that father. This is where you have to understand we are an American people. We are an American ethnicity. Okay? We have a right to exist and to prosper. And this is how you do it, by building a strong family. All these traditional family folks, this is how you do it. It's not just about fighting abortion and gay marriage, as bad as that is, those things are, but it's also being something positive and creating that.
Yeah, and the Bible says to the women, you're to be silent. You're to be silent in the church. You're to have a head covering on. You're to be silent in the church. You're not to speak. And if you have a question about something, when you're home, ask your husband. Your husband's your authority, even on Scripture. You ask him if you got a question. Okay.
Now, that's not the situation in America today, is it?
Of course not.
Okay.
Of course not. But it's saying that husband has a lot of authority that's been taken away by our Constitution.
But we have a way forward, don't we? I mean, the way forward is
the church can get strong. Judgment begins in the house of God first. So the church leadership could step up to the plate if they had the courage.
They could if they wanted to. Just like what they could with social media.
Okay, this is Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media here in South Bend, Indiana, and our guest is David Wemhoff, and hopefully he'll continue to write good articles and want to get his research out. So, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Peter. I think we got a lot out today. We let Inner Mirifica out of the closet.
Good. Okay, till next time.